again, for those of you who have not worked with Jupyter Notebooks before, as you get this opened up, you can run these cells in a few different ways. There's certainly this run button up in this top toolbar, or our kind of file edit view menu, and that will run a cell. I typically will be making use of some keyboard shortcuts wherein we're in a cell, holding shift and pressing enter will run that cell. And we can confirm that because we see this input number keeps increasing. And so that's kind of just to get us started off here. Again, as we go through, as you get the notebook loaded up, please make sure that you keep running all the cells as we go down, because they're going to, we're going to need successive cells to run code. Okay, so we'll run this one. It's going to bring in pandas. Again, that's our analytical library we're using. Someone asked, can we repeat how to run a cell? Sure. So again, the way that I will commonly do this is just holding shift and pressing enter. There's also a run button up here. I find that sticking with keyboard shortcuts is very fast and convenient. So shift enter will run that cell. All right, now we'll go ahead and run the cell below that, this next one. And this is going to download the data that we'll be working with. This is actually running in the shell, this is actually a bash command, just not super important for now. And let's take a moment to address what this data set is. So I have it linked here. And this goes to the University of California at Irvine Machine Learning Repository. This is a fantastic resource if you are doing any sort of tooling around with data science, working with pandas or machine learning, really any language, and want to play with some open source data sets. So this data set in particular consists of two data streams, observing how people are entering and exiting a particular office building at UCI, the Cal IT 2 building, I suppose. So this goes over 15 weeks. There are 48 time slices per day. So every half hour, we're counting the number of people who went in and the number of people who went out. Now, the overall purpose and intention of this data set is to use these inflow and outflow values to predict whether or not there is some event going on. Perhaps there are unusually high number of people entering in a particular day or at a particular time, we have a massive influx of people coming in, and perhaps we predict the end of an event by sort of the opposite of that, a lot of people coming out at once, more than usual. So we won't quite be getting into that predictive analysis today, but we'll start looking at how, some of our exploratory visualizations, could inform how we would set up that analysis. Aside from that, let's go ahead and look at the data set as we load it in. So I've got the data loaded. I'm just going to read it into pandas. And it's going to come in a little bit like this. So we have 4 columns: flow, date, time, and count. And from reading the data dictionary, sort of the document describing how the data set is oriented and set up, we find that for some reason, a 7 in this flow column relates to inflow, and a 9 relates to outflow. Not particularly sure why that's the case, but back in our, let's say outflow, inflow, rather a 9 is inflow and a 7 is outflow. Back in here, they note that they've encoded it in that particular way. And just to make this a little bit easier to work with, wrote another function. I'm not going to go through exactly all the code works here, because we're kind of giving a more high-level demo. That's going to load in that data. It's going to translate that flow column so that it actually says out and in. We can work with it a little bit more straightforward that way. And I will note that where we had that date and time column, we also have this column that says timestamp. And timestamp is not just the date and the time just kind of smashed together as strings, but rather it is something that we can work with sort of interactively. So to sort of demonstrate that just a little bit, we could pull up the timestamp like this. And this is actually a date time object. And what that means is if we wanted to go from this timestamp and we wanted to get just the month, for instance, we could certainly do that. And so we would have July, 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 right? We could very similarly, of course, get the date. We could get the time, the hour, and so forth. We can probably imagine how a lot of this is going to go. One thing I'll note that we might investigate a little bit towards the end of this is we could even pull the day of week. And that's going to set 0 through 6, Monday through Sunday. And so because we have this kind of interactive timestamp object, or not necessarily interactive, but not just a string, not just text, right? We're going to be able to quickly and kind of on the fly modify our data frame, our data set, right? According to sort of particular characteristics of times and dates. So from this current view, we have our timestamp sort of indexing. This is like the, actually what's describing the rows of this. Again, we have that flow. We still have this single column out and in. To make it a little bit more convenient, what we're going to do is we're going to pivot this. And now we'll have an inflow and outflow. And I've also created a column for net flow, right? Just inflow minus outflow. For a particular time. Notice some stuff coming in the chat regarding being able to download the notebook. So I'll paste in the link to the GitHub repository. And you'd be able to download it from there. Okay, so we went from that single column. We just pivoted that out so that we'd have a column for outflow and inflow. We've also made a column for net flow in case we're interested in that. And we'll be working with this sort of pivoted data frame from here. So we can start getting into a couple of different things that, that we might want to visualize. So another function that's going to, for each day, we're now going to, we've grouped by a particular day. And for a particular day now, instead of inflow and outflow being just for that hour, they're going to be cumulative. So if 2 people came in one particular hour, maybe let's bump this up to a few more rows. We can see that between midnight and 7 a.m., we have nobody entering the building. Happy to see that. And then in between 7 and 7:30, 3 people come in. These numbers now represent their cumulative, right? So around 9, we have another person come in. 9:30, we have another person come in. And so this is going to be cumulative. And in doing so, we could plot throughout the day, right? How many people are coming in until we get to all of them. We could very quickly, and again, this is sort of one of the strengths of Pandas, very quickly turn this into some other plots. What if we wanted to look at the outflow? What if we wanted to look at the net change? And we'll note that it's often the case between midnight and 6 or 7 a.m. that the net change is negative. If we think about this sort of in context of this being a university building, it makes sense that maybe breaking on dates here isn't exactly what we would want to do. We could imagine instead, rather than indexing just by date, maybe switching this so that a chunk of 24 hours, let's say maybe started at 6 a.m. and went to the next day at 6 a.m. But we'll leave that for perhaps a separate discussion. But in doing so, if we look at the net, we could sort of see how people are coming and going throughout the day. So perhaps unsurprisingly, we have a lot of people entering, sort of between 9 and noon. We have a decent outflux around noon, probably looking like lunchtime. We have people, it's like they're probably returning, and then, tapering off in the evening. And, again, I'll note that while this is a relatively simple visualization, this is something that, would take a fair amount of, reworking the initial format of the data set, which, again, as we recall, simply came in as a single column describing inflow or outflow, a date and a time, and then a account, whether it was inflow or outflow. So we've done a lot in a relatively small amount of time. And because we could just keep programmatically changing our data set, just a few keystrokes, again, we don't have to spend a lot of time navigating through menus and so forth. I will also note that in here, we are just visualizing a single day. And we're certainly welcome to go through a couple different days here. So we're looking at July 28th, 2005 right now. We bump that up to the 29th. Certainly take something like October 31st. And so, we just have this sort of, kind of as we pick up with it, we have this nice, just programmatic interface. We can start with just a few functions we've written, data frame we've set up, looking at a lot of these different initial visualizations very quickly. Another thing I'll note, so in addition to sort of taking this, adding up cumulatively, which gives us this really nice view, we can also do some resampling in Pandas. And so what we might want to do here is we might want to look at, okay, well, we have this split up by hour or by half hour currently. What if we wanted to change the sampling rate would say, what if we wanted an hourly count? What if we wanted, to count by 6 hours, or even to count per day? Pandas is going to make this pretty simple for us because we can just take a data frame and call this resampling method. And so what we've set up here is, I will actually, so we've now gone from every half hour. So we'd have a timestamp here and a timestamp at 0030. But we've added up so that we're now on every hour. And again, this is something that we could have set by, I have this defaulting to a single hour, but we could have had this go by 2 hours or even a day. And of course, maybe if we did day, then we could take a look at, are there particular days where we had a really, really high inflow? Maybe we'll come back to that in just a little while. Let's go back to hourly here. So we have broken out by every hour. So another thing we might do now, we were initially looking at only a single day and looking at kind of that inflow and outflow. So what we might want to do now, rather, is to visualize not just a single day, but what does an average day look like in this building? And how does that relate to, our inflow and outflow? Let's get some confidence regions, for which we can just, in addition to the mean, let's just plot a region where we, plus and minus the standard deviation of this particular column. We're looking at the inflow right now, but, we certainly could have done this with the net as well. And that might tell us a little bit more about the average day. But again, there are just a lot of things. And again, we can kind of keep changing this very, very quickly as we go along. Now let's talk a little bit more. And I suppose I might make a new section here. And I will be updating the links I supply or I'll be updating the repo. So if you were to visit this link later, it will reflect the new code I write in this demo, but I wanted to include just a little bit of live coding as we went along, just so that we could, kind of see the workflow a little bit more interactively. So what we'd done before, we'd set up this hourly data frame, but I noted that we could do this by day as well. And so let's try that. We'll say df daily data frame, going to be resample. This is a resample pivot using tab to get some autocomplete here. Nice feature of Jupyter Notebooks. And what are we passing in? We're passing in the data frame we want, which is df pivot, which we created above, and a sampling rate. Pivot and a sampling rate. And here we can say h for an hour, like we saw before. We could say 2h for 2 hours, but we're going to stick with just d for, of course, day. And let's take a look at this data frame now. And, again, we can kind of start to see that there are major differences from day to day, in the number of people coming in and out. So for instance, on the 24th here, it was a very, very quiet day. And on a lot of these days, it's going to look much higher than that. Now, one thing I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation was that because we're working with these date time objects, we could really quickly look at things like the day of the week. And it's probably the case that, maybe we could imagine that this first day pretty likely is going to be a weekend. We're seeing right after that a whole bunch of days with far greater traffic. So maybe we want to do something like filter out weekends. Let's look at df daily a little bit more. I'm going to reset the index here. So this timestamp column, which is now sort of, labeling these rows, is just going to become another column again. Look like this. Look at that timestamp column in more detail. This is still a date time object. So we could still certainly do something like day of week here. Sorry, we can say .dt, .day of week. Properties. I think I actually may need to do this just a little bit differently. So we'll reset that index. And again, this makes our data frame look like this. We can access that timestamp column to look like this. We can go dt. We have this accessor. And we can say day of week. Just giving us some trouble for some reason. Cannot insert local zero, it already exists. That's because I kept running that over and over again. We'll start there. Apologies for that. So df daily, again, we have this timestamp column brought back out. And we could say, from that timestamp column, give me the day of week. And sure enough, I'll note that the very first day we had here, where we had this really low, total inflow and outflow for that day, our day of week is 6, and that's going to be a Sunday. So perhaps not surprising that there was so much less. So again, we have 0 as Monday, all the way up to 6 as Sunday. And so perhaps we could filter out those weekends, and maybe that'll give us a little bit better idea. So let's say our daily data frame, and we just want to index that out. So just do a little bit of filtering. So let's say this should be all of the days in our data frame where the day of the week is less than 5. Again, 6 is Sunday, 5 is Saturday. So if it's less than 5, 0 through 4 are Monday through Friday. We only have weekdays. Maybe we'll call this df weekdays. Look at df weekdays now. Again, the 24th has been filtered out. And maybe now let's try looking at even some simple histograms. Look just, right at a histogram for a particular day. We can see that typically, there's somewhere around, between 200 and 300. But we certainly did have some days where this, even broke 500 and closer to 600. So again, thinking back to the fact that our, the original intention with this data set is, is to detect the presence of events. We could, again, certainly imagine doing this on a daily level, just finding those days where that rate was really high. Or we might think of using this, as a time series. Maybe we want to detect the event sooner, not just at the end of the day. But maybe we could consider sorting this. In is what we want. Of course, if we sort by the, sort according to this in column, what we perhaps want is for this to go in descending order, because we're interested in those really popular days. This should be ascending equals false. And so we have a couple dates we could examine that, again, these are maybe the top 5, greatest dates, the number of people who came in. And again, this might suggest for these particular dates, we have something of interest. Let's go back up and, that's this function we were using before that was giving us this nice plot for a particular day. Let's just copy this cell down here, just working again kind of interactively. And let's just consider filling in with some of these particular dates. So November 1st, it's our biggest day of all. So 11:01. And here we saw, the, I guess, net people who were coming in. And, because we are adding, because in this case, we're adding, inflow and outflow, maybe we don't really want to see net here. Maybe we looked at just the inflow. We could see that there were a lot of people filtering in to the building actually later in the day, right? A lot of this, we were seeing a lot of people coming in, I guess really starting around 9, but well, I guess, this is cumulative, but we had this peak, I guess is what we're really interested in, which suggests that, right where this slope increased, maybe that suggests that there's some event around there because all of a sudden a bunch of people were coming in at once. And of course, if we look down, this looks like it's a little bit after 6 p.m., which is not when we typically observed people coming into this building. Looking back once again to our sort of plot of the mean behavior, we were usually, looking at the net, or maybe I guess here we could look at the cumulative. We were usually tapering off a lot. The slope would be decreasing after noon, and in fact, we saw that we were actually increasing a lot right there. So again, this is a day where we saw a particularly large inflow. We could continue checking this for different dates. And we could find, maybe for some of these that, again, we see this steeper behavior later in the day. Now, one thing that I was hoping to get into, but which the code broke a little bit, unfortunately, I was reviewing some of the notes, and so some of which will have to be updated in this notebook. You come back in about an hour or two, code will be sorted out, would be to look at something like a couple spark lines of the, what each month looks like throughout the day, sort of the average day each month, just looking at those trends very close together. Now, generally what we had done here is we had started grouping this data frame, working our way to grouping it by month. So we still have everything as before. We're going by hourly. We also have a column for the month now. And we could this monthly inflow. Look at what this is giving us. Frame. So it's starting to give us some trouble, and unfortunately, not going to be able to cover some of the Sparkline stuff just now. Again, I'll have an updated notebook for this, viewable kind of in a report format, interactive through Binder, viewable on GitHub. Able to follow up with, but I believe actually, if I'm not mistaken, so sorry, that I'm actually getting pretty close to our time here. Callie or Sarah, maybe you could remind me here if we were going until 12, scheduled for 12:15 to close up, or if we were scheduled for an hour today.
I believe it was 45 minutes, but if we have questions, we're welcome to go on.
Yeah, so that's what I wanted to make sure, is that we could take some time to switch gears from here and address some questions that you guys have. So these, feel free to paste in the chat. I'll be looking at this. I think Callie is also going to help sort of field and organize some questions as well. So with the last few minutes, what questions do you guys have that I can hopefully, address as we're closing out?
Freddie Mercury, have you gotten that one before, Michael?
I have not, and I certainly appreciate it.
Good one.
Though I don't know if I've got I don't know if I'll be able to hit the high notes quite like that, but I certainly happy to hear the nickname. Yeah, again, any other questions that we could address for you guys?
Great.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for, oh, okay, sure. So I had a question coming in. So this melt function we see. And a quick question I'll address as I'm kind of scrolling back to that. Jacqueline asked if the notebook would be viewable after the webinar ends. It absolutely will. So that Binder link will still work. The GitHub link will still show my most recent changes in the notebook. And I'm actually going to continue updating that throughout the day to really finish building out some of the other things I wanted to show everybody. So check back probably end of day today or tomorrow for that. But regarding the melt function, which I think we first brought up actually all the way, where are we using melt? So we're using that in our monthly in group. So let's just take a quick look at one of these. If we were to do like DF hourly, for instance, and we were to say melt, essentially what this would do is it would turn this wide data into sort of long or sort of, I guess, narrow data. So if we were to say melt this, and let's keep date as an ID variable, this would give us something like following. And maybe we want a little bit more than just date here. Maybe we'll say date and time. And what this is going to look like is, now for a particular date and time, we have a variable, in this case in, and a value at that time. So this is then recompressed, from in, out, and net all into a single column. All right. The link to the notebook, yep, Callie had posted those again. Pratik asked how to access the notebook on Jupyter. This is would take a few minutes to like really fully address. But generally speaking, if you wanted to run a Jupyter Notebook server on your own machine, you would just need a Python distribution with the Jupyter library. Now, the best place to get this is through the Anaconda distribution, which comes packaged with Jupyter. And actually, if we just look up anaconda.org, will basically take us right to where we can download this. Or perhaps download Anaconda. So I would say, for any operating system you're on, Anaconda will have a particular distribution you can work with. So I'll give this link as well. Avinash noted that wget was not working correctly. I likely would I might need to replace that with a call to the curl function. I guess wget might not be in every bash environment. So I'll make that should be a quick fix, and I'll have that updated certainly very soon. And it should run on a little bit more straightforwardly in that sense. Okay, we're a little bit over. Check if there was any other comments I want to hit. How do we add a comment to a block to describe what it's doing? Actually, this is a really good question because this would talk a little bit about what makes Jupyter so it's kind of like powerful, or I guess just nice for reports and exploration, is that in addition to these code cells, so if I make a new cell, and you can do this from insert cell above or below, we click over on this part where it says in. Notice that this is in blue rather than clicking inside of it, which makes it green. We click here. We can say cell type markdown, or we could have just pressed the M key. And now if we write some text in here, we hit enter, this is going to look a little bit different, right? We could make a title with some pound keys. We could even, make just like bullet lists, make like numbered lists. Those always work a little bit funny. And so there's a lot we can do, not just to put maybe comments in code, but to have actually like build out a report, which again makes these a really powerful tool for a lot of different use cases.
Michael, thank you so much. I feel like everyone got a lot of rich takeaway today, so that's really exciting. So for everybody, thank you for joining us. As always, all of these are going to be up on our YouTube channel. Michael's done some fantastic demos prior to this that are up there, so make sure you're subscribed to us. Go ahead and check that out. I also am going to put the link in here to our Data Incubator Fellowship. If you'd like some more information, go ahead and click that link. And in the meantime, thanks everyone. Have a terrific rest of the week. Thanks,
Thank you
Michael.
very much.
Thanks again, everyone. Take care.